She said it into a microphone, in front of 40,000 people, at the finish line. She held up the trophy and named every engineer on her team. Every name but one. The engine in that car wasn't hers. The man who designed it was watching from a folding chair outside the pit lane, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold, with a 7-year-old asleep against his shoulder. His name was on nothing. His drawings were in her files. His math was in her engine. 3 weeks after that race, the United States Patent Office received a filing that stopped her season cold, live, on camera, in front of the same 40,000 people who had watched her win. She did not see it coming. He had seen nothing else for 2 years. The question was never whether the design was his. The question was whether a man with no lawyer, no team, and a daughter who drew horses on the back of his legal briefs could prove it before she buried him under paperwork and money and time. He could. What happened next, nobody in that paddock was ready for. The morning it all began to move. The morning the filing landed and the clock started, Eli Voss was standing at the kitchen counter, in a house that smelled like motor oil and maple syrup, watching his daughter arrange her colored pencils in a specific order that only she understood. Her name was Cora. She was 7. She kept a stuffed rabbit named Soot on the chair beside her at breakfast every morning, propped against the table leg like a small gray boarder who paid rent by being present. Soot had one ear that flopped and one that stood, and Cora had informed Eli at some point during the previous winter that this was because Soot was always listening for 2 things at once. Eli had not asked what the 2 things were. He had learned, with Cora, that the answers came if you waited long enough. She arranged the pencils darkest to lightest, left to right, before she would touch her food, every morning, without fail, even when they were running late, even when it was raining, even the morning of her school concert, when Eli had been standing by the door with her coat for 6 minutes. She lined them up. Then she ate. The order mattered in a way she had never been asked to explain and never tried to. Eli watched her do it and drank his coffee and did not rush her. "Dad," she said, without looking up from the pencils, "if you make something and someone else uses it, is it still yours?" He set his cup down. "Yes," he said. "Even if they don't say so?" "Especially then." She considered this. She moved a burnt orange pencil 2 spaces to the left. Then she picked up her fork. Eli turned back to the counter. Outside the kitchen window, the garage sat 40 feet from the house, a single-bay structure with a corrugated steel roof and a light that burned yellow even in full daylight. He had built it himself 4 years ago, with lumber he bought in stages when the money allowed it. The sign above the door said Voss Mechanical, in hand-painted letters that Cora had helped him stencil when she was 3, the letters slightly uneven, the V a degree or 2 too wide. He had never fixed it. He did not intend to. Inside that garage, on a shelf above the workbench, sat a single binder, black, unmarked, its spine cracked from years of being opened and set flat. The binder contained 114 pages of engineering drawings, valve timing diagrams, combustion geometry calculations, thermal load projections across 11 different fuel mixtures. The work of 2 years of evenings after Cora went to bed, 2 years of the kind of thinking that had once been Eli's profession and had since become the thing he did instead of sleeping. He had not always run a 1-bay garage in Harlan, Kentucky. He had spent 11 years as a motorsport powertrain engineer, not a hobbyist, not a weekend tinkerer. He had led the engine development program for a mid-tier racing team out of Charlotte, building competitive power plants on budgets that forced real ingenuity, the kind of ingenuity that came from understanding the physics so completely that you could find what everyone else had missed. He had a particular gift for combustion geometry, the way fuel and air moved inside a cylinder, the angles and timing and pressure curves. He could hold all of it in his head simultaneously, the way some people hold a melody. He did not talk about this. It was simply what he was. His wife, Denise, had understood it. She had also understood, better than he had, that the life around that work, The travel, the seasons away, the politics of team sponsorships, was not a life she wanted for their daughter. They had talked about it. They had planned around it, mapped out a version of things in which Eli stayed closer to home, consulted remotely, kept his hand in without the road consuming him. Denise died of a cerebral hemorrhage on a Tuesday in March, 8 weeks after Cora was born. Eli left Charlotte 4 months later. He packed what mattered, Cora's things, the binder, a single framed photograph of Denise sitting on the hood of a car she had never cared about, but that Eli loved, laughing at something off to her left, and he drove south until the driving felt finished. He had not gone back. The binder came with him, not because he planned to use it, but because leaving it felt like losing the last version of himself that Denise had known. He put it on the shelf. He opened it sometimes, late, after Cora was asleep, the way a person returns to a page in a book they've already read, not to find something new, but to confirm that the thing they remembered was real. He had sent the design to one person. One. Her name was Diana Cassell. He had known her professionally, a brief overlap during his Charlotte years, a woman with sharp instincts and a reputation for building competitive teams from the outside in. He had sent it not as a pitch, not as a business proposition, but because a mutual colleague had mentioned her team was struggling with their engine program, and Eli had thought, quietly and without ceremony, that his geometry might solve what they were fighting. He sent the binder scan. He sent a note that was 4 sentences long. He did not follow up. That was 22 months ago. 6 weeks ago, Diana Cassell's team had won the Southeastern Pro Series championship. Her driver had crossed the finish line 4 seconds clear of second place. The margins in that series did not run to 4 seconds. The motorsport press had called it a technical leap, unprecedented output from a mid-displacement platform, combustion characteristics that nobody on the technical commentary panel could fully account for. The team's lead engineer had been interviewed afterward and used the phrase proprietary internal development 3 times in 4 minutes. Eli had watched the broadcast on a laptop propped on the workbench, the garage door open to the November air, a torque wrench in his hand that he had set down without finishing the bolt. He had not been angry. Anger would have required surprise. He went inside. He checked on Cora. He stood in the door of her room for a moment watching her sleep, soot tucked under her arm, her face completely still. Then he came back to the garage, sat down at the workbench, and opened the binder to page 1. The humiliation did not happen in a back room. It did not happen in private, over a phone call, in a letter from a lawyer, in any of the quiet ways that people with power prefer to handle the people without it. It happened at the Southeastern Pro Series awards ceremony in Nashville, Tennessee, on a Saturday afternoon in December, in a ballroom that held 600 people and was currently holding closer to 800. Eli had not intended to be there. He had filed a preliminary complaint with the United States Patent Office 11 days earlier, a formal claim of prior art and design origination, supported by the binder, by the original file metadata from his engineering software, showing creation dates that predated Diana Cassell's team's claimed development window by 19 months, and by a single email he had sent her that she had never replied to but had also never deleted, which her own server logs had produced when the Patent Office made its initial inquiry. He had done all of this himself. He had a paralegal in Harlan, a woman named Ruth, who handled the paperwork for 3 small businesses and a cattle operation and had never touched an intellectual property case in her life, who had helped him format the filing correctly. He had paid her $220. What he had not anticipated was that the Patent Office's preliminary inquiry would land on Diana Cassell's desk 4 days before the awards ceremony, and that Diana Cassell would decide, with the full confidence of a woman who had never been wrong in public, that the best response to a pro se complaint filed by a mechanic in rural Kentucky was to stand at a microphone in front of the motorsport world and dismiss it before it could become a story. Her publicist had arranged for 3 motorsport journalists to be present with credentials. Her legal team had prepared a statement. The plan, as Eli would later understand it, was to use the ceremony itself, the trophy, the room, the cameras, as the rebuttal, to make the filing seem small by surrounding it with something large. Eli drove to Nashville because Ruth called him the night before and told him she had heard, through a contact at the Regional Motorsport Association, that his name was going to be mentioned from the stage. She did not know in what context. She thought he should be there. He brought Cora, because there was no one to leave her with on a Saturday. She wore her green corduroy jacket and carried soot in the crook of her arm and fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere past Bowling Green. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting near her headrest, not quite touching it. They arrived late. The ceremony had already begun. A man at the door with a lanyard told Eli this was a credentialed event, and Eli showed him the letter from the patent office that named him as the complaining party in an active inquiry against one of the evening's honorees. The man read it twice, then stepped aside. They stood near the back. Cora held his hand and watched the stage with the patient attention she applied to most things she did not yet understand. Diana Cassell came to the microphone 40 minutes in, after the sponsor recognitions and the junior category awards and a video tribute that ran 3 minutes too long. She was exactly as Eli remembered her. Tall, composed, dressed in a way that communicated money without announcing it. She held the championship trophy with both hands and set it on the podium as though placing a period at the end of a sentence. She thanked her driver. She thanked her crew. She thanked her sponsors by name, slowly, giving each one its moment. Then she paused, and something shifted in her posture. A small, practiced adjustment that Eli recognized as the pivot toward a prepared remark. "I understand," she said, into the microphone, with a smile that reached the back of the room, "that there are some questions being raised about our engine program. Questions from outside the sport." She let that sit for a beat. "From someone who, as far as I'm aware, has not competed at any level in over 6 years. Who works, and I mean this with complete respect, out of a one-bay garage in a town most of you have never heard of." She tilted her head slightly. The smile held. "I want to be very clear tonight, in front of everyone who matters in this sport, that our technology is original, our development is documented, and the individual raising these questions does not have the standing, the credentials, or frankly the evidence to challenge what this team has built." She lifted the trophy. "This is ours. We earned it. And no filing from a filing cabinet in Kentucky changes that." The room gave her what she was looking for. Not loud laughter. It was too polished a room for that, but a low current of approval, the sound of 600 people deciding, in the span of 4 seconds, that she was right and he was not worth knowing about. Eli did not move. He was aware of Cora's hand in his. He was aware of the specific quality of the silence that had settled in his own chest. Not the silence of a man who had nothing to say, but the silence of a man who had already decided that this room was not where he intended to speak. Cora looked up at him. His face was still, not rigid, not careful, simply still, the way a level is still when it is perfectly true. She studied it for a moment, then looked back at the stage. She tightened her hand slightly around his fingers and leaned against his arm. He looked down at her once. Just once. Then he looked back at Diana Cassell, who had moved on to the next item on her prepared remarks, already finished with him, already certain that the weight of the room and the height of the stage had settled the matter the way weight and height always had. On the drive home, somewhere past Bowling Green, Cora spoke from the passenger seat without opening her eyes. "She said your town wrong," she said. Eli glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She said it like it was a bad word. "But it's not a bad word." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "It's not." Cora pulled Soot tighter against her side and said nothing else. Outside, the interstate ran flat and dark through the Kentucky hills. The white lines, coming and going in the headlights, like something being counted. The patent office examiner assigned to the case was a woman named Loretta Fisk. She had worked in the mechanical engineering division for 19 years. She had reviewed claims involving turbine components, agricultural machinery, marine propulsion systems, and, on one occasion that she still considered the most interesting of her career, a novel fuel injection architecture for a Formula Regional Series car. She was not easily impressed. She was also not easily misled. She called Eli on a Wednesday morning in January, 4 weeks after the Nashville ceremony, while he was underneath a '09 F-150 replacing a rear differential seal. He came out from under the truck, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and answered on the fourth ring. She told him she had reviewed his filing. She told him the metadata on his design files was consistent with his claim. She told him the email chain, the one Diana Cassell's server had produced, the one she had never replied to but had read, the server logs confirming she had opened it twice within 48 hours of receipt, was significant. Then she said, the examiner panel had requested a live technical review, both parties, a room at the Patent Office field office in Louisville, 3 weeks from Thursday. She asked if he could attend. He looked across the garage at the binder on the shelf. Yes, he said. He did not tell her he had no legal representation. He did not tell her he had $340 in the operating account for Voss Mechanical, and that the differential seal he was currently installing was the last job on the books for the following 2 weeks. He did not tell her that his paralegal had never been inside a patent office hearing room, and that the closest thing he had to a technical expert witness was himself. He thanked her, hung up, and went back under the truck. That evening, after Cora was asleep, he opened the binder to page 37, the combustion chamber geometry diagram, the one he considered the heart of the design, and read it the way he always read it, not to check his work, because he did not need to check it, but to remember that the work was real, that it existed, that the math on those pages was not an opinion. The Louisville field office occupied the 3rd floor of a federal building on West Broadway that smelled like recirculated air and old carpet. The hearing room was smaller than Eli had expected. A long table, 6 chairs, a projector screen at one end, fluorescent lighting that made everything look slightly dehydrated. He arrived 20 minutes early with the binder, a folder of printed file metadata, and Cora, who sat in the chair beside him with soot in her lap and a small notebook in which she was drawing horses. Diana Cassell arrived 8 minutes later with 2 lawyers, a technical consultant in a blazer that cost more than Eli's truck, and a rolling case of printed documentation that one of the lawyers positioned at the end of the table with quiet deliberateness. She saw Eli. Her expression did not change. She sat down and turned to consult with her legal team in a voice too low to carry across the table. Loretta Fisk entered last, with 2 colleagues from the mechanical division. She was shorter than Eli had imagined from her voice, compact, unhurried, carrying a single manila folder and a paper coffee cup. She looked at both sides of the table with the same neutral attention. She did not look like a woman who had decided anything yet. We're here to review the technical merits of the prior art claim filed by Mr. Voss against the engine design patent application submitted by Cassell Motorsport Engineering, she said. Both parties will have time to present. We'll begin with the claimant. Eli opened the binder to page 1. He did not use the projector. He placed the binder flat on the table and turned it so the panel could see, and he began to walk through the design the way he had built it. Not from the front to the back, not in the order a presentation would run, but in the order the physics demanded. He started with the combustion chamber geometry, the specific crown angle he had derived from a thermal load model he had built himself over the course of 3 weeks in the summer of 2 years ago. Working from first principles rather than established templates, because the established templates produced the wall heat losses he was trying to eliminate. He explained the angle. He explained why the conventional value failed. He showed the calculation on page 12. He showed the iteration sequence on pages 13 through 19, 11 discarded geometries with annotated failure modes, each one dated in his own handwriting, each date falling before Diana Castle's team had claimed their development began. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. He moved through the pages with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, the specific, unhurried focus of a man who understood the thing he was discussing at a level below language. One of the panel members, a younger man seated to Loretta Fisk's left, who had not spoken since the session began, leaned forward slightly on page 37, the combustion chamber diagram. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he opened the folder in front of him, Cassell Motorsports patent application, and found the corresponding diagram, and set the two side by side. He did not say anything yet, but he went still in a way that was different from the stillness of listening. It was the stillness of someone who has just understood something and is deciding what to do with the understanding. Diana Castle's technical consultant was watching the same comparison from across the table. His jaw was set. He wrote something on a notepad, folded it, and slid it to the nearer of the two lawyers without looking up. Eli turned to page 41, the valve timing architecture. He explained the specific offset he had introduced to manage overlap at high RPM without destabilizing the low-end torque curve. A solution he had arrived at not from precedent but from a conversation he had once had with a retired engine builder in Charlotte who had described, in passing, a problem he'd never fully solved. Eli had solved it. The solution was on page 41. The date in the file metadata was 21 months before Diana Castle's application date. He turned one more page. He stopped. "That's the design," he said. Loretta Fisk looked at him. She looked at the binder. She looked at the folder from Cassell Motorsport, still open to the page the younger examiner had placed beside Eli's diagram. She picked up both documents and held them level, side by side, under the fluorescent light. The room was completely quiet. Across the table, one of Diana Castle's lawyers set down his pen. Cora looked up from her horse drawing, sensing something in the quality of the silence, the way children sense a change in weather before adults do. She looked at her father. His hands were flat on the table, relaxed, still. His eyes were on Loretta Fisk. "Dad," Cora said quietly, not asking for anything, just confirming he was there. "I'm here," he said. He did not look away from the panel. Loretta Fisk set both documents down. She looked at her two colleagues. Something passed between the three of them that required no words. Then she looked across the table at Diana Castle and said, in exactly the same tone she had used for everything else in the room, "We'll need to pause proceedings." The pause lasted 11 days. Eli did not know what happened inside the patent office during those 11 days. He knew that Loretta Fisk's office had requested additional documentation from both parties. He knew that Cassell Motorsports' legal team had filed a procedural objection on day 3, which Ruth had called him about, in a voice that tried to sound calm and did not fully succeed. He knew that the objection had been reviewed and declined on day 7, because Loretta Fisk's office had sent him a one-paragraph letter confirming the proceeding would continue. He knew these things because they were documented. Everything else was silence. He worked. There was a carburetor rebuild on a 72 Chevelle that he had been putting off, and he did not put it off anymore. There was a brake job on a church van belonging to a congregation 40 minutes up the road, and he did the brake job. He swept the garage floor twice in 1 week, which he did not normally do. Sweeping was what he did when the thinking would not stop and he needed his hands to have a reason. On the 8th evening, after Cora was asleep, he was at the workbench with the binder open in front of him and a cup of coffee that had gone cold at his elbow when he heard a car in the driveway. It was a rental, a black sedan, road-dusted, parked at an angle that suggested someone unfamiliar with the property. He watched it through the garage window for a moment before the door opened. Diana Cassell got out alone. She was dressed differently than she had been in Louisville. No blazer, no team lanyard, dark coat, her hair pulled back without the precision it had carried at the ceremony. She walked toward the garage light with her hands in her pockets and stopped outside the open bay door. Eli did not move from the workbench. She looked at the garage, at the binder open on the bench, at him. "I'd like to talk," she said. "All right." She came as far as the threshold and stopped there, one foot on the concrete apron, one still on the gravel. "My team is prepared to offer you a licensing settlement, retroactive credit for prior contribution, a payment." She named a number. It was not a small number. It was the kind of number designed to feel like the end of something, designed to feel like more than continuing could be worth. Eli looked at her. He did not feel the number the way she expected him to feel it. He felt it the way he felt a calculation that was technically correct, but solved for the wrong variable. The door from the house opened then, the interior door that connected the garage to the kitchen. Cora stood in it in her pajamas, soot hanging from one hand, squinting against the garage light. She had heard the car. Diana Cassell looked at her. There was a fraction of a second, brief enough that most people would not have caught it, in which something moved across Diana Cassell's face. Not guilt, not quite. Something more structural than guilt. The recognition of what she was looking at, a child, a garage. A man with a binder on a workbench and $400 in his business account, who had driven to Louisville with his daughter in the passenger seat because there was no one to leave her with. Eli stood from the stool. "Cora," he said, without heat, without hurry. "Go back to bed, sweetheart. I'll be in soon." Cora looked at Diana Cassell with the level, unhurried attention she applied to most things she did not yet understand. Then she looked at her father. She nodded once and went back through the door and pulled it shut behind her. Eli turned back to Diana Cassell. "No," he said. She held his gaze. "The proceeding could go on for months. My team has resources you." "I know what your team has," he said. She was quiet. "The design is mine," he said. "The patent office knows it. You know it. The number doesn't change that. It just asks me to agree that it doesn't matter." He picked up his coffee cup, found it cold, set it back down. "It matters." Diana Cassell stood at the threshold for another moment. She looked at the binder. She looked at the shelf above the bench, at the framed photograph of Denise that Eli had moved from the house to the garage the week after. Louisville, without quite knowing why, only that he wanted her there. She left without saying anything else. The rental car backed out of the driveway, its headlights sweeping once across the garage wall, and then the sound of it was gone. Eli sat back down at the workbench. He opened the binder to page 37. He read it in the yellow light for a long time. Then he got up, went inside, and stood in the door of Cora's room until he was sure she was asleep. She was. Soot was tucked under her chin. Her colored pencils were lined up on the nightstand, darkest to lightest, left to right, because she did it there too, before she closed her eyes, in case she needed them in the morning. He turned off the hall light and went back to the garage. The continuation hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in February, at 10 in the morning, in the same room on the third floor of the Federal Building on West Broadway. It did not feel the same. The fluorescent light was the same. The carpet smell was the same. The long table and the 6 chairs and the projector screen were all exactly as they had been. But the room had a different population this time. Loretta Fisk's 2 colleagues were present again, plus a third examiner Eli had not seen before, a senior reviewer from the Washington office, according to the badge, who had flown in the previous afternoon. Diana Cassell's legal team had grown by 1 attorney, and at the back of the room, in chairs along the wall that had not been there in January, sat 4 people with press credentials from 2 motorsport trade publications and 1 regional business journal, because word of the proceeding had reached the press in the way that things reach the press when a legal team files enough procedural objections to make the silence conspicuous. Eli sat at the claimant's table with the binder and Cora, who had her notebook and was already drawing. Loretta Fisk opened the session at 10:04. She reviewed the procedural record. She noted that the additional documentation request had been fulfilled by both parties. She noted that the panel had completed its independent technical analysis. Then she looked up from her folder and addressed the room in the same even, unhurried tone she used for everything. The panel has determined, she said, that the combustion chamber geometry, valve timing architecture, and thermal load management approach present in Cassell Motorsport Engineering's patent application are not original developments of that organization. She did not pause for effect. She did not look at either party. She read it the way findings are read, as fact, delivered into the record. The design originates with the prior art submission of Elias James Voss, with creation dates confirmed at 19 to 23 months preceding the Cassell application date. The Cassell Motorsport patent application is hereby rejected in its entirety. Priority of invention is assigned to Mr. Voss. She set the folder down. The room was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then, one of the journalists at the back wall wrote something. The scratch of the pen was the only sound. Eli did not move. He sat with his hands flat on the table, the binder closed in front of him. And he looked at Loretta Fisk, and he felt something settle inside his chest that had not been still in 2 years, something that had been held at a specific tension for so long he had stopped noticing the effort of holding it. He felt it release, not dramatically, not in a way that showed, just gone, the way a sound stops and you only notice the silence after. Cora looked up from her notebook. She read his face the way she always read it, carefully, completely, looking for the thing underneath the surface. She reached over and put her hand on top of his without saying anything. He turned his hand over and held hers. Across the table, Diana Cassell's senior attorney was speaking in a low voice close to her ear. She was not moving. She was looking at the surface of the table in front of her, with the particular stillness of someone who has just watched a calculation they were certain of produced the wrong result. The senior reviewer from the Washington office spoke next. Procedural language about the patent record, correction about the origination documentation being entered under Eli's name, about the timeline for formal notification. Eli listened. He understood all of it. He also understood that the part that mattered most was already done. His name was going into the record. The design had his name on it. Whatever came after, licensing discussions, the championship result, the coverage in those 2 trade publications, all of it would now have to begin from that fixed point. His name on the document, assigned by the United States Patent Office, in a room where people with press credentials had written it down. When the session closed and the panel rose from the table, Diana Cassell stood. Her attorneys gathered their materials in the efficient, eyes-down way of people who have lost and are already thinking about what comes next. She started for the door. Then she stopped. She turned. She walked back to the claimant's table and stood across from Eli, and for a moment she simply looked at him, not the way she had looked at him in Nashville, from the height of the stage and the breadth of the crowd, but level, close, without performance. "I read it," she said. "Your design. I read it the day you sent it." A pause. It was the best thing I had seen in 10 years. Eli looked at her. "I know," he said. She extended her hand. He shook it. Once. Brief, without warmth but without cruelty. The handshake of 2 engineers who understood each other completely and had chosen different things. She left. Cora watched her go. Then she looked at the binder on the table. "Is your name in it now?" she asked. "In the official one?" "Yes," Eli said. She looked at this information with the same seriousness she brought to the pencil arrangement. Then she nodded, as though confirming something she had expected to be true all along, and turned back to her notebook. On the horse she was drawing, she wrote his name in small, careful letters along the bottom of the page. Eli Voss. She underlined it once. He was home before 4. This was the thing Cora noticed first. Not the binder under his arm, not the way he moved through the door with a looseness that had not been there in months, but simply that the truck was in the driveway when she came through the front door from the school bus, and the light in the kitchen was on, and something on the stove was already making the house smell like garlic and butter. She stopped in the doorway with her backpack still on and looked at him at the stove. "You're early," she said. "I am," he said. She dropped her backpack on the bench by the door. She took off her coat. She went to the kitchen table and arranged her pencils, darkest to lightest, left to right, then climbed into her chair. Soot went on the chair beside her. He made pasta. Nothing elaborate, the kind of dinner assembled from what was on hand, the kind that does not announce itself as a celebration but simply is one, by virtue of being unhurried. He grated cheese directly over the pot because the grater was closer than a bowl. He let Cora stir, which she did with the focused attention of someone who had been given a real job. They ate with the window above the sink, showing the last of the February light going gray over the fields behind the house. After dinner he washed and she dried, because that was the system, and she was precise about it. She dried each dish and placed it in the cabinet in the specific order she preferred, which was not the order Eli would have chosen, but which he had long since decided was not his order to choose. When the kitchen was done, she went to get her reading book. He went to the shelf by the door, the narrow shelf that held his keys and a coffee can, of loose change and, now, one new thing. A folded document, white, official, bearing the seal of the United States Patent Office. His full name printed on it in the clean sans serif type of federal records. He had not framed it. He had not displayed it. He had folded it once and set it there, between the coffee can and the wall, in the most ordinary place he could find. He looked at it for a moment. Then he left it where it was. Cora came back with her book and they sat together on the couch under the lamp, her legs across his, soot wedged between them, and he read to her the way he always did, without performance, without voices, just the words moving through the room at the pace that felt right. After 2 chapters she was quiet for a while. Then she tilted her head back against the couch cushion and looked at the ceiling. "Dad," she said. Do you think the engine knew?" She turned her head to look at him. "That it was yours, I mean, while it was in her car. Do you think it knew?" He looked at her. He looked at the shelf by the door, at the folded white document sitting in the ordinary place he had put it. Then he reached over and turned off the lamp. Some things carry their maker in them long after the maker has let go, waiting with perfect patience for the world to finally ask the right question.